In today's episode, when taking a dive on a test worked out better for everyone. Want to speak to my manager? I hope you like roles. Modern warfare needs 1 terabyte of RAM. So let's get started. When taking a dive on a test worked out better for everyone. When I was in college, I took a class with this gem of a professor. On the first day of class, he asked how many people thought they would make an A. This being a tough engineering school where AC actually was average, something like 5 students out of a class of 60 raised their hands. He then announced that's how many A's he would give out that semester. All of our tests for that class were multiple choice exams we took online. We were allowed to refer to our notes during the test, and we were allowed to study from old tests as long as we didn't refer to the old tests during the exam. Fair enough. I studied for the first test, but didn't have access to any old exams, so I did fine but not great. By the time the second exam rolled around, I had made a friend who was in a fraternity that had multiple copies of old exams from this professor. We and a couple of others took advantage of the rule allowing us to study from old tests. We quickly discovered that on these 50-question tests the professor had a repertoire of about 75 questions he pulled from. On the first copy of the test we studied from, we took the time to work through the answers to make sure we understood. By the time we got to the fourth copy, we could answer before we even finished reading the question. Exam time rolls around and, just as with previous years, he pulled from the same pile of questions. I think it took me 12 minutes to answer everything correctly. In hindsight, I probably should have let the clock run for a bit. We had an hour, but I went ahead and submitted it because I had other things to do. I checked in with the others I studied with the next day, and all of them had gotten 90% plus. Sweet, definitely using that plan for test 3 and the final. The next day we all received an email from the professor letting us know we were being reported to the dean for an honor code violation. He claimed he had never had anyone make better than an 80 on one of his tests before, so the fact we all made 90% plus was clear proof in his mind that we cheated. This being an engineering school, we were all nerds who were pretty scared about receiving such an email, but we agreed the best course of action was to talk to the professor before he went to the dean to tell our side of the story and see if we could sort things out. We reached out to him, and he agreed to meet with us after class. When we met with him and laid out our case, he was surprisingly receptive to our explanation. I think in reality he didn't want to go through with the hassle of reporting us to the dean. So we left the meeting feeling pretty good and agreed within our study group we would keep studying from the old tests. Well, about a week before test number 3, this guy announces to the class that because some of us had found the previous test so easy, the next one would have twice as many questions in the same amount of time. Being the cheeky sob I am, I asked him as I was leaving class what would happen if someone made a 100 on this test. God help you on the final, was his response. So we used the same approach in studying for the test, and found the same pattern of a limited set of questions. Of course, in addition to the extra questions, he had promised all of the questions on this test would be new. So while we again got to the point we had the questions and answers memorized, we tried to make sure we understood the concepts as much as possible to deal with what we expected to be his wrath. Test day comes around and lo and behold, 87 of the questions are pulled directly from old tests. 10 are from a guest lecture where he basically pulled the question and answered directly from the slides, and 3 were filler questions like 1 + 1 = and the earth revolves around the sun, true or false. I knew I had everything right. I also knew I didn't want to screw myself and everyone else for the final. I purposely answered the filler questions incorrectly so if he looked at the results he would know what I had done. I got my 97. I never heard from the professor about that third test, but I like to think of him rage scrolling through the results. I don't remember details about the final, but do remember the format being the same as what had been announced at the beginning of the semester. My study group also worked together on a group project which we also made A's on, so if he really only gave out 5 A's that semester, we received them all. Want to speak to my manager? I hope you like roles. Okay, this happened about 20 years ago, when I was 17 and working in a major UK supermarket, in a rather affluent London suburb. This was my first proper weekend job. I used to work in the bakery, and it was the best section to work in a supermarket. My job was to make sure that bread and fresh cakes was well stocked and presented, and test the odd donut for quality control purposes, so that we can make sure there was fresh items available before we ran out, slicing fresh bread and making sure rolls were stocked and tongs were available. One busy Saturday, I was doing a quick inventory count, and when I came to the individual rolls, I saw a middle-aged lady in a large furry coat and luscious red fingernails. I didn't pay much attention to her until I saw her with a crusty roll in her manicured and bejeweled hand, give it a squeeze, poke her thumb through the crust and threw it back in the basket. She did it again, and when she reached in to try a third one, I piped up. "Excuse me, ma'am, would you mind using the tongs provided, please?" She ignored me and grabbed the third roll and broke the crust, so, a little louder, I said, "Ma'am, please use the tongs provided." She heard me that time and glared at me and said, "I beg your pardon? Ma'am, please don't grab the rolls, please use the tongs in the basket." "Are you saying that my hands are dirty?" She then raised her voice while waving her embellished hand at me, wiggling her fingers so they sparkled as they moved. "Are you suggesting that this is filthy?" Well, knowing that folks tend not to wash their hands before using trolleys and baskets, without blinking or thinking, I said, "Yes, they are. Please use the tongs." The inevitable happened. "I want to speak to your manager at once. You should learn to respect your elders and betters. I'll have your job for this insolence." So, I called for the bakery manager to come on down, bearing in mind, this was a busy Saturday. He was in his whites and wanted to know what the problem was. The woman went into a sob story on how she was testing the rolls for freshness, and I was so rude to her, telling her how her hands were filthy, a few crocodile tears here and there, how she had never been so insulted. In a stern voice, my manager turned to me and said, "Did you say this to her?" Now, I was starting to think I did something wrong and a bit nervous. I replied, "Yes, I asked her to use the tongs." She ignored me, so I asked her again. "Okay." My manager turned to the woman, said that he will be back shortly. He needed to do something and get some paperwork. While my manager was out of earshot, the woman crowed, "See what happens when you don't know your place." I said I could have your job for this. My manager did a quick count of the rolls, muttered 224 loudly, and went into the back room. He then emerged with an industrial-sized black bin liner. He then proceeded to empty 8 large baskets of rolls into the bin liner, and a label for 224 individual granary rolls, tied up the bag, handed it to her, and said, "Here you are, madam, they're all yours." "I beg your pardon?" "The rolls, madam, they're all yours. You openly admitted to contaminating our stock. You ignored a member of staff when she asked you repeatedly to use the tongs. You've wasted my time. You are paying for the stock you have damaged. Good day. What am I supposed to do with all of these bloody rolls? I only wanted 2. With a dazzling customer service smile, my manager chirped, "Not my concern, madam. Security will escort you to the tills and make sure they are paid for. Enjoy your weekend." He then turned on his heels and went back upstairs to the bakery. The woman looked at me, then the huge bag, absolutely aghast, so I did the only thing I could do, grab a random loaf of bread, take it to the bread slicer, and laugh in the back room. I saw her almost every week afterwards, always using the tongs. We wouldn't get away with that now, but easily my favorite manager, in all of my years of working. ETA, I do not consent to having this shared outside of Reddit. Talk. Modern Warfare needs 1 terabyte of RAM. Hi all, mandatory LTL, FTP. On mobile, so formatting will be a bit sketchy, and disclaimer, not in tech support, but hopefully will be eventually after completing my comp sci degree. Was in a team viewer session with a colleague, but 10 brief minutes ago when I discovered to my distaste that his 2 terabytes HDD was filled to the brim, as was his 120 gigabytes SSD. Upon inquiring what was using such immense portions of precious digital real estate, I was met with the standard, "I'm not sure, it's always been like that." I just delete stuff when it's too full to function. Type response. Enter WinDir stat to save the day. For those of you unaware, this little app displays the contents of your drives in a graphical layout, with the size usage of each file proportionately scaled to the others. Normally one can expect a large block of medium-sized files, some downloaded videos, a few Steam games, but never in my years have I opened the application to find one giant MING monstrosity of a block consuming well over half the poor 2 terabytes drive, barely leaving other little files to squeeze in around the edges, clawing desperately for some leftover ones and zeros to call home. The seasoned among you will already have guessed, but this file was none other than the villain of the piece, the dark and shady pagefile.sys. Our hero, yours truly, swam through the dark recesses of the system configuration in search of the settings pane that would confirm my hunch, all the while my colleague's eyes growing wider with understanding and guilt. Eventually I found it. The page file options were set to manual configuration, and that manual configuration was a default size of 1 terabyte, with permission to expand to 1.2. My colleague offered an explanation for his actions. Apparently some 4 years ago he fancied himself a game of modern warfare, and was displeased to find it kept crashing. Rather than just quit some background applications or buy some more memory, he decided the best solution was to boost his page file size. First a GB, no good. Maybe 2 gigabytes. No dice. Eventually he must have just opted for 1 followed by a random amount of zeros, happening to be an entire TB. Years passed and he didn't notice the change day to day as the page file gradually grew fatter, gorging itself on any scraps of executable it could find. Slowly expanding to occupy 1.2 terabytes of his total 1.8. And that is how he has lived. Without question. For 4 years. A page file size drop and reboot later, and he was a happy camper, and I had my first TFTS post. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.